In the quiet, isolated town of Willow Creek, there stood an old two-story house nestled at the end of a winding, tree-lined road. The house, though once charming, now held an air of neglect and mystery. The paint was peeling, the roof was in need of repair, and the garden was overgrown with weeds. The locals whispered about the house, saying it had a dark history, but no one knew for sure. This is where our story unfolds, on a cold and stormy autumn evening. John, a man in his early 30s, had recently moved into the house, seeking solitude after a difficult breakup. He had inherited the house from a distant relative and saw it as a chance to start fresh, away from the noise and bustle of the city. The house was much larger than he needed, with creaky floorboards and drafty windows, but it was his, and he was determined to make it a home. As the night deepened, John settled onto the couch, the glow of his phone casting eerie shadows on the walls. The wind howled outside, the trees rustling and scratching at the windows. He chose a horror movie, ironically titled The Watcher, and hit play. The movie's haunting music filled the room, but John felt a sense of comfort, knowing that the horror was contained within the small screen. About halfway through the movie, John began to feel an unsettling sensation, as if someone or something was watching him. He paused the movie, looking around the room. The feeling persisted, a cold prickle at the back of his neck. He shrugged it off, attributing it to the movie's eerie atmosphere, and resumed playing the film. Minutes later, the sensation returned, stronger this time. John couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He glanced over his shoulder, his eyes scanning the dark corners of the room. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but the feeling lingered. He decided to get up and turn on more lights, hoping to dispel the unsettling sensation. As he stood, he felt a sudden chill, as if an icy draft had swept through the room. He looked up at the ceiling, and for a moment, he thought he saw a pair of glowing red eyes staring down at him. He blinked, and the eyes vanished. John shook his head, trying to convince himself that it was just his imagination playing tricks on him. He rubbed his eyes, attributing the vision to the long hours he had been spending in front of the screen. He walked to the light switch, his heart pounding in his chest. As he reached for the switch, he heard a soft knock at the front door. The sound was so sudden and unexpected that John jumped, his hand freezing midair. He stood still, listening, but the knock did not repeat. He waited for a few moments, his breath held, but there was only silence. Cautiously, John approached the door, his eyes fixed on the peephole. He saw nothing but darkness outside. He hesitated, then decided against opening the door. Instead, he returned to the couch, trying to shake off the growing unease. He told himself that it was just the wind, or perhaps a branch falling against the door. John resumed the movie, but his focus was shattered. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside, sent a shiver down his spine. He tried to lose himself in the film, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger. He found himself glancing over his shoulder more frequently, his eyes darting to the dark corners of the room. Suddenly, the power went out. The room was plunged into darkness, the movie's eerie music replaced by an oppressive silence. John fumbled for his phone, using its light to navigate to the fuse box. As he reached the hallway, he heard a low, menacing growl coming from upstairs. It sounded like a wolf, but that was impossible. There were no wolves in Willow Creek. John's heart raced as he climbed the stairs, the growl growing louder with each step. He reached the top of the stairs and shone his phone's light down the hallway. The growl seemed to come from the bathroom. He approached the door, his hand trembling as he reached for the handle. He could feel the cold sweat on his palms, his heart pounding in his ears. Just as he was about to open the door, he heard a sudden flush from inside the bathroom. The sound was so abrupt and unexpected that John stumbled back, his phone slipping from his hand. It clattered to the floor, the light flickering before going out completely. John stood in the darkness, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. He heard the growl again, closer this time, as if whatever was in the bathroom was now right behind the door. He turned to run, but his foot caught on something, sending him crashing to the floor. He landed hard, the wind knocked out of him. As he lay there, he heard the sound of something heavy moving down the hallway, the floorboards creaking under its weight. He felt a cold, oppressive presence looming over him, and then suddenly the power surged back on. The hallway was flooded with light, and John saw a dark, shadowy figure standing at the end of the hallway, its red eyes glowing with malice. The figure lunged towards him, and John screamed, scrambling to his feet. He ran down the stairs, his heart pounding in his ears. He reached the front door, fumbling with the lock before finally throwing it open. He stumbled out into the night, the cold air hitting him like a slap in the face. John ran down the street, not looking back, his mind racing with fear and confusion. He didn't stop until he reached the safety of a nearby abandoned shed, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He leaned against the shed, his body shaking with adrenaline and terror. As John caught his breath, he looked back towards his house. The lights were on, casting a warm, inviting glow. But John knew better. Whatever was in that house was not welcoming. He knew he could never go back. He thought about the stories he had heard about the house, the whispers of a dark history. He wondered if there was any truth to them, if something sinister truly lurked within those walls. John spent the night huddled in the shed, his mind racing with thoughts of what he had experienced. He couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the glowing red eyes, the menacing growl. He tried to rationalize it, to tell himself that it was all in his head, but he knew better. He had felt something, seen something that defied explanation. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, John made a decision. He would leave Willow Creek, leave the house and its dark history behind. He would start fresh somewhere else, somewhere far away from the eerie shadows and unsettling sensations. But as he walked away from the shed, he couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was in that house was still out there, watching, waiting. He looked back one last time, the house standing silent and ominous in the early morning light. He knew he would never forget that night, the terror he had felt, the darkness that had enveloped him. If you enjoyed this terrifying tale of John's night in Willow Creek, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to hear more spine-chilling stories. Leave a comment below sharing what you think was really lurking in that house. Was it a supernatural entity, or something even more sinister? Click the bell icon to stay updated on new uploads. And remember, sometimes the scariest things aren't just in our imagination. Until next time, sleep tight, and don't let the shadows watch you tonight.